It's good to be with you again. The text tonight is Matthew 17, 1 through 9. There's a phrase that I came across that I love: internalize the sacred. I want to give you that phrase, and then I want to go back to that phrase throughout the devotion tonight. I wish I had invented the phrase, but it's a phrase that Richard Rohr, the Franciscan priest who heads the Center for Action and Contemplation, he said, internalize the sacred. How do we take our relationship with God, what we deeply believe, and how do we move it from being just an object that we hold outside of ourselves to being the subject of our lives? The story in the text is about what we call the transfiguration. Jesus decides to go up a mountain, and he takes with him the inner circle of his disciples, Peter, James, and John. They go up to the mountain, and suddenly this Jesus, who appeared for all purposes to be just human, suddenly he is what we call transfigured. His face shone like the sun. His garments radiated with light. The disciples were taken with this. Peter even said, "This feels so good up here on top of the mountain. Let's just stay here." God breaks into the conversation and says to this Jesus on top of the mountain, "You are my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." And then he adds a phrase to that. He says, "I want you to listen to him." We go up the mountain. It is a wonderful experience. But the fact is that if you and I are going to make a difference in lives, make a difference in the world, we can't stay on top of the mountain. We come back to the world as it is. For just a moment, I don't want to talk about just the world in Jesus' day, but I want us to talk about how we internalize the sacred and come back to make a difference in the world in which you and I live. We know that there are tremendous problems and issues that we face. I don't want to spend time talking about all of these things, but things like the exclusion of people on the basis of race, on the basis of their ethnic background, on the basis of their religion, the exclusion of people whose sexual identity may be different from ours. It is that kind of world. It is a world that is filled with issues and problems, and you and I are called not to stay on the mountain, but we are called to enter the messiness of life, and it is there we make a difference. We say to people, listen, we are trying to internalize the sacred. We are trying to see the world through the eyes of the Christ who loves us. We're trying to see others. We're trying to see the divisions, the problems, the difficulties, the climate change, the massive use of guns in our nation, war throughout our world. And we're trying to be a part of that, not to be overwhelmed by it, but to internalize the sacred and to see life through the eyes of the transfigured Christ. I have a concern, and that is that a lot of churches that I know that are progressive, that are moderate, many of them have moved to deal only with social issues. And I want to say those issues are very important to me as a Christian. They were important to me as a pastor. But I am concerned that we have allowed people who shout and yell and who see life differently from us to take from us the word evangel. We are called not just to change the world, not just to speak to the issues that the world faces and that our nation faces, but we are called to say to people, in Jesus Christ, we internalize the sacred and our lives are transformed, and we know what it is to have the abundant life. I understand why some people are reluctant to talk about the evangel, the good news, the changing of people as individuals. It's because many of us grew up in what a man said to me coming out of church a few years ago. It was a church I had preached in for the only time. And he said to me, well, what we need today is more hellfire and damnation. I said to him, I would believe that what we really need in the church is more love. I understand, but I'm not going to allow somebody who misuses the word evangel to steal that word from my vocabulary. We are about changing the problems that face people, the social issues, but we are also about changing the lives of people one by one. I know why we're reluctant, why we're timid. It's because we grew up, many of us, in this kind of hellfire and brimstone type of preaching. And we heard little about the grace and the love of God. I want to say something to you that you may have difficulty accepting, but I want to say this. I really don't believe in an eternal hell where people are tormented in an everlasting way. I simply cannot reconcile a loving God who knows that is going on, a loving, gracious God. When somebody who has lived a selfish life, when somebody dies, that's the end of that person. And for me, that is hell, because we lose the opportunity to be with those that we love in the place that God has created, in the place where we, in fullness, internalize the sacred. C.S. Lewis said, "The latch of hell is on the inside. Anybody on the inside can open it." I wouldn't say it quite that way. I would say, if we have no faith in anything beyond ourselves, we cease to exist. And hell is living life with no purpose and dying with nothing to look forward to in our lives. Internalize the sacred. Jesus is with us, by us, ahead of us, behind us, beneath us, above us, but most of all, Jesus is in us. And I have to tell you, that is the hope that gives me strength to go back from the mountain to where people live.